Hi, I'm Steve Barsh, Chief Innovation Officer of Dreamit, and I want to talk to you about some really critical questions you want to ask when you're meeting with customers. So we want you to meet with customers early, and let's go over some tricks and key questions to ask. The whole idea behind this presentation and discussion is everybody says, well, you should go talk to customers early, but nobody really seems to know exactly what to ask them. So let's dig into that. So in this discussion, let's talk about how you master the customer meeting. We're going to talk about when to meet them, who you actually should be meeting with, where the meeting should take place, what to show and ask, and how to really run the discussion so you make that time as effective and productive as possible for everyone. So let's talk about when to talk to customers. So our advice, you want to talk to customers as early as possible. You have a new idea for a new product, an idea for a new company, get in front of customers and start talking to them about it. As soon as you even have a basic positioning statement for that product or company, get in front of those customers, because that positioning statement is going to start with, here's the problem we're solving. Well, why don't you go talk to 6, 10, 20 customers and see if they really have that problem and if it resonates with them. You don't need to wait to have a prototype or a mock-up. You don't need to wait to have a minimum viable product or even the product itself. Get in front of customers. We'll show you the questions to ask, how to ask them, and when to ask them coming up next. So we talked about when to meet with customers. Let's talk about next which customers you should be meeting with. How do you select the right customers? So I want you to think about, in no matter what industry you're working in, who benefits, who approves, and who pays for your product or service that you're selling. And those can be very different people across different industries, and it's important to meet with all of them. There could be somebody who benefits by using the product, but they're not the person who approves or pays for the product. If you look at this image of a woman with a small child, we know who really benefits. Well, in some ways, maybe both benefit. We know who's going to approve, and we know who's going to pay for it. But the child who really benefits from it is very different from who approves and who pays. So when you think about which customers to meet with, think about all of these categories to potentially meet with. So you're going into a meeting, and we want to make sure that you're really prepared for that meeting. So before you walk into that meeting, particularly if it's a team of people walking in, or you can think about this all on your own, is to review what are the objectives of the meeting. What are you trying to achieve from the meeting? What are you trying to learn from the meeting? What are you trying to prove or disprove? If you've got assumptions, you have assumptions you want to prove or disprove, think about that as you walk into the meeting. And think about, particularly if you have other team members and you're doing a multi-team meeting, walking out and thinking to yourselves, this meeting as you walk in, this meeting is going to be successful if what happens? And get in that state of mind before you walk in and as you're getting prepared for the meeting. If it's multiple people walking in, talk about the roles and responsibilities of your team participants. Sometimes we'll see Dreamit companies where one person goes in is really going to be pointing the discussion, another person is really going to be the scribe to take notes. So the point person can constantly be thinking of the next discussion point and the next question, and that person that's really in a scribe mode is really taking notes. What you want to avoid in meetings is ping-ponging back and forth, trying to one-up each team member. You want to look really professional, so make sure roles are really clear when you walk in. Also make sure that you know your audience before you walk into a meeting. Who are these people? Have you looked at their LinkedIn profile? Have you looked at their background? There's a Dreamit company called Charlie, which is terrific. Think about turning on the Charlie app. It looks at your calendar, looks at the email addresses of the calendar entries, and it'll send you a briefing in advance of the meeting. Great way to make sure you're really prepared. So you want to be like a Boy Scout and make sure you're prepared for that meeting. So we talked about getting prepared for the meeting. Now let's get the meeting started, but let's make sure we started on the right foot. I find 80% or more of meetings don't start out this way, and I highly suggest you take our advice on this. When you walk in, first thing, confirm the meeting length. You may have sent an email that said, can we get together for 20 minutes? Find out exactly how much time they have, or do they have to run to a next meeting? Do you have an extra 10 minutes? Important to know that from the beginning. Next, you may want to remind them how you connected to them. I was referred by Bob, I was referred by Raphael. Just to give them a refresher, it may have been weeks since you sent the email that suggested that you meet. Level set the conversation, reviewing things like your educational background if it's relevant, and work backgrounds. We talk about this particularly if you're in an environment that's very scientific or very engineering oriented and degrees really kind of seem to be important. So if you have an MD, PhD, or you're meeting with other people that are MD, PhDs, sometimes it's important to talk about that and just talk briefly about your background. When I mean briefly, I'm talking about 30 seconds. You don't want to waste valuable meeting time in a 20-minute meeting spending 5 minutes going over your bio. It's not that critical, just a light touch on that. Review the roles and responsibilities for you and maybe other team members in the room. What are your roles and responsibilities? And the people you're meeting with, what are their roles and responsibilities? So you understand the audience that you're speaking to. Restate the objectives of the meeting, what you're trying to accomplish. Just be really clear about that. Last point, and I can't drive this home hard enough, is make sure to say to people, if you're an early stage company, that you can't hurt my feelings. I want to talk to you about our product, our service, and our idea. And if you don't like what I'm saying, if you don't agree with it, you're doing me a favor by telling me and giving me negative feedback. We find one of the most dangerous things for an early stage entrepreneur is getting a false positive. People generally want to be encouraging and saying what you're doing is great. You're not looking for positive affirmation. You're almost looking for negative feedback. It's more valuable to you. You certainly want to keep advancing your company, get sales, get to the next partnership. But we say a lot that early stage entrepreneurs should use that expression. By the way, you can't possibly hurt my feelings in this discussion. If there's something I say that doesn't make sense or you don't agree with, you're doing me a favor by telling me about that. So if you're an early stage company going in for a meeting, you can go in and we talked about meet with people even before your product's built or before your MVP. You can test your positioning statement. If you're not familiar with a positioning statement, there's just 5 key elements that go in there. Who your target market is, what problem you're solving or the need that's addressed, the key benefits that you deliver, who you view as your competitors, and what your differentiators are. We've seen early stage companies go into meetings with potential customers and spend an hour just trying to get through the positioning statement, talking about these elements. It's really important. You can walk a potential customer or partner through and talk about these elements to make sure that you're framing the problem and solution correctly and what you think are your differentiators or your competitors. We've been in situations with early stage Dreamit companies and we say, we think the competitors are X and Y. The people we're meeting with bring up A, B, and C, and we walk out and turn to the company and said, who's A, B, and C? And they'll say, never even heard of them. But it's great. So you learn a lot by just going through your positioning statement, and it can be very rich and extremely valuable, particularly if you're early stage. Now, as you're forming these early meetings, you may be tempted and say, well, I'll just do it as a phone call, or I'm going to do it as a video call. What we suggest as much as possible is go to your customer and meet with them in their environment for those initial meetings. It may cost a little bit, it's a little harder to do, but it's very, very powerful to meet with them face to face. So meet with them in their environment. It's easier to get the meeting versus going to a coffee shop or having them come to your office. Say, look, I'll come to your office on these dates or these times. Does that work for you? Make it really easy for them to say yes. Make sure to make it comfortable for them. So if you meet on their turf, you're making the situation much more comfortable if you meet with them on their turf. As well, they can pull others into the discussion. A lot of time we'll see Dreamit teams go in and they think they're meeting with one person and 3, 4, 5 people emerge to meet with them. And it makes that conversation and discussion much richer for you. And that only occurs if you meet in their environment and they start to pull people into the discussion. It's great. Also, by meeting with them and going to your customers, it gives you the opportunity, if you're there, to see their workflow. We see that all the time, where people say, well, come into the radiology reading room or come into our admissions office and we'll show you how we do it today. You can see existing solutions and workarounds because oftentimes you're replacing something else that's already in place. You can see how they do things today. You can get clues that help you build rapport and see their body language. So clues you can see, do they like fishing? What's on their wall? Little clues that help build rapport, and their body language is really important. Are their arms crossed and they're leaning back? Are they sitting, leaning in, and their foot shaking underneath the table like a little puppy? And you can read that body language. It's really hard to get that over the phone, even on a video call. So as much as you can, try to go to your customers. Maybe it's a drive, a train, or a flight, but try to get to your customers. And if you're going to meet with one and travel, use some of the email ninja techniques that we talk about in our other talks And use a geographic forcing function. So if you're going to go somewhere, don't just meet with one customer, set an objective and say, how do I meet with 3 or 4 if I'm going to travel there? So we talked about a little bit earlier that one of the best things you can do in an early stage meeting is to go through your positioning statement. The first part of the positioning statement is identifying and defining the problem. So let's talk a little bit further about that. One of the things you can do when meeting with a customer or potential partner is to ask them, do they have the problem, and how painful is that problem? You want to get an indication, is the pain a nice to have if they solve it, a need to have, or a must have? How severe is that pain? How compelling is the problem? It's also important to understand how frequently does the problem occur. Maybe your software or service or your system or device you're charging on a frequency basis. So is it something that in your model you have an assumption that they're going to use your product 100 times a week? Well, it's good to confirm that problem. Maybe they're only going to use it once a week, so you could ask around frequency. You could ask them, how do they deal with the problem today? The problem obviously already exists. How are they dealing with it today? There can be some interesting learning around that. You can ask them, do you think others have this problem? It could be a great way to get referrals, and we'll talk a little bit more about referrals in a few moments. If it's not a problem for this customer, you really want to reflect and ask yourself, are you speaking with the correct target customer? I mean, maybe this is just a particular customer that doesn't have this exact problem. Maybe the problem doesn't exist as widely as you thought, or maybe you're not describing it correctly. But if you don't get the feedback around the problem that you state when you're confirming it, just think carefully and really reflect depending on how they answer the questions around the problem. Now, as people start to answer your questions in these types of meetings, start to think about getting into the root cause and asking why up to 5 times in a row when somebody, if they say, we don't have this problem or we wouldn't use it that frequently, you can dig in and start asking why. It's important to get into the root cause. So don't just take an answer at face value. A lot of times you want to dig in, and there's really rich learning. You want to probe responses to better understand the answers that you're getting, and you want to identify key causes of problems or pain points, and you're going to identify them by digging down and digging into the root cause, and it's pretty simple. You just ask why 5 times in a row is the technique. Following the idea of using a positioning statement as a way of framing one of these early stage customer meetings, one of the other things we talk about in a positioning statement is the benefits that you deliver and what's your unique differentiators. What are your unique selling points? So think about some of these questions when you're going in for your next customer or partner meeting. You could ask about your product or service. Does it offer benefits that are important to you or compelling to you? Does it help you achieve your metrics and goals? Now you're asking that question because you're trying to understand their metrics and their goals or their KPIs, their key performance indicators. It's great if you're solving a problem that's tied to a specific metric that they're being measured on as a business. Does it seem unique compared to existing offerings that are out there? So you want to ask them if the unique differentiators that you're talking about are coming through, and do you seem unique? So the next question is, does it seem compelling enough to purchase? So you can ask the potential customer or partner, how compelling is this to you? And how can we make it even more compelling? Now, by asking questions like that, they might talk to you about additional benefits they're looking for. Maybe it's about an integration that you could build to another system or another device. So you're looking for things that could even strengthen your product around benefits and differentiators. Let's keep using this framework around using a positioning statement just to guide these early stage conversations and these discussions. Next up, let's talk about competition. So you're meeting with a customer, you're meeting with a potential partner. Maybe you go through a little bit on the competition, lightly. You don't want to ding and say negative things about your competition, but you want to test to make sure that you understand who your competition really is. So maybe you share who you think your main competitors are and see if your target customer or partner, do they agree that these are your competitors? Interesting, because a lot of times new competitors will emerge or people you don't think are even your competition. You could ask them to name other competitors that come to mind when you start talking about your solution. And you can even ask, you want to be careful on how you do it, but what do you see as weaknesses of the competition? Because you're looking for the ability for you to differentiate based on other people's weaknesses. Next up, most to many of early stage companies we talk with are very unsure about their pricing. We see a lot of companies that come into Dreamit. They might be Post-seed, pre-Series A, they might be at the very beginning, but a lot of times they're very unsteady or unsure if they're at the right pricing. So in these very early conversations, you can take the opportunity to test pricing. Let's take a look at some techniques that we suggest you use. You could ask the target customer, is this valuable enough to use or buy? Or would you switch if they have an existing solution? Realize there's tremendous inertia to stay with what people currently have. Could you actually get them to switch based on the value proposition you're delivering? You can ask them, how valuable is it? What would you be willing to pay? Now, that's a very open-ended question. You're not always going to want to use that. You're usually going to want to close it down a little bit. Let's give some examples of that. So what you can do is you can do a number of techniques, right, that you're trying to measure the willingness to pay. So you could say to that potential customer, would you purchase if this was X dollars, so that X could be a fixed price? If it was $99 a month, $50,000 a month, if it was $1 million, if it was $9, you could have it as a fixed price. You could do a price range and get their feeling. So if we were charging somewhere between $19 and $29 a month, if we were charging somewhere between $20,000 to $40,000 a month, would that work for you? And see how they react to that price ranging. Now, when you're doing those ranges, remember you could say per user, each, per month. Think about the different units of measure that you're using when doing price ranges. Now, the last thing that we suggest, hopefully you're meeting with lots and lots of customers to get a feeling about everything about your product, service, and or company. You can test different pricing with different customers. So sometimes we see teams will go sometimes a little bit extreme higher and see if they can get that price to stick. Is the willingness to pay, they said to the first customer $19 to $29 and got a high signal on it, and they met with 3 customers in a row and said $190 to $250 and still got positive signal. So you can test different price points with different customers to start getting really, really valuable feedback and de-risk that assumption around pricing. Now, we find a lot of early stage companies, and this is in a very B2B type situation, don't understand the purchasing process in larger organizations. And it is critical that you understand how people purchase software, products, devices, and how that purchasing process works within an organization. So, one of the first questions you can ask, who would need to approve the purchase of a product like this? And a lot of times, the person you're meeting with is not the person that's going to approve. Where and how do you buy products like this? The reason we're asking this is sometimes in a large organization, they have contractual commitments that they have to buy certain products and services from certain vendors. And if you're not in that supply chain, they're not going to buy from you. You need to know that and need to know that early. You can ask, how does the approval process work? Where does the budget come out of? And how frequently are those funds budgeted? So that grouping of questions is really, really important. You want to know, does it need to go before a committee? Is this something that gets budgeted once a year? What budget does it even come out of? We've seen one startup situation where the budget was approved once every 3 years. They had budget for this type of product. If that's true, it's not very happy news, but you need to know that, and you want to know that early. So it's important that you understand, particularly if you're selling a B2B product, that you understand the purchasing process within that organization very, very early on. So when you're meeting with customers early, I wanted to also spend a few moments talking about what you should do and not do if you're showing a demo of your product. So just some quick tricks and traps and rules of the road. Now, you can demo a mock-up, prototype, MVP, minimum viable product, or the real product and still get very valuable feedback. Focus. Make sure to focus on what your audience cares about. Make sure to do it from a use case point of view. Think of it from the audience point of view. What problem are you solving for them? Show it in a use case driven approach. So using that common use case scenario helps set up the problem, and then you can show the benefits. So here's the problem that people we see typically have. Here's how our solution solves it. Some really important points. We see more than 50% of companies, when they demo, they go feature by feature. They try to show every single thing. Here's how you add a customer, browse through customers, change customers, delete customers. Who cares? How does your software, service, product, device, how does it solve my problem? Show it to them in a use case driven fashion and tie it back problem and solution. But don't show them every feature. It's not critically necessary. Now we've talked about how to use a positioning statement to kind of guide the conversation. We've talked about using a demo. Before you're going to leave from that meeting, some important points we want you to think about. One great thing we see truly great teams do when they go into meetings like this, when they leave, one of the questions they ask at the end of the meeting is, are there 2 or 3 other people that we should speak with? So they're looking for referrals, they're looking for intros, but they don't say, are there other people? They actually put a small number on it. Are there 2 or 3 other people that you think we should speak with? I find personally, 90% of the time, somebody will tell me about 1 or 2 other people that I should speak with. Can we follow up as things progress? If things have gone well, we find most people are like, absolutely, follow up with me, keep me up to date. It's great. You just want to make sure the door is left open as you keep building out your company and your solution. A huge, huge differentiator you can use. Most of these discussions are very lopsided. You're extracting tremendous value from them. How about giving back? If you want to differentiate yourself and really set yourself apart, ask that person you've been meeting with for the last 20 or 30 minutes, well, how can we help you? Besides our product and what we're doing, we're deep in this industry, we're deep in this space, we're running into interesting people. What are your biggest problems, even unrelated to what we're doing? How can I help you? Are there people you're looking for, solutions, an intro I can make for you because I really appreciate your time? It'll really set you apart if you do that. You can trial close. So what I mean by that, you could say, look, to buy this solution, to use a product like this, what would we need to do to earn your business? What would we need to do, if you don't want to be that strong in the statement, what would we need to do to get an organization like yours to start using our product? So you want to get that trial close going so you can try to find out what's the path forward. So make sure you know what next steps are, next steps for them and next steps for you, and always make sure when you're leaving the meeting to say thank you. Usually people have given quite a bit of their time. It's very valuable to you. Make sure to thank people for it. So we've talked a lot about driving forward in face-to-face meetings, particularly for B2B type of products. I just want to touch briefly upon surveys and online testing, because a lot of people say, well, I want to get feedback from my potential customer. I'll just run a SurveyMonkey and I'll get the feedback. Our piece of advice, particularly if you're building a B2B service or product, start with face-to-face meetings, get that direct feedback, and read that body language. It's really, really valuable. Then, after dozens of face-to-face meetings, you can scale it up and do some type of survey to get broader data. But it's the qualitative data and quantitative that you want to get being face-to-face. Additionally, you can use online testing and test things like your positioning statement and price points using things like Google AdWords or a Facebook ad. And you can test things online and see what people click on and drop them to a landing page. But again, for B2B, great to start face-to-face. Now, we've laid out a lot of information about going out, meeting with customers, and what type of questions you should ask, what the environment is. I can't stress enough that you want to really go with the flow. These are very fluid conversations. You can't just go exactly in the order. So here's what I want you to think about. I want you to use these questions we've gone over as a checklist to make sure you really cover everything. But don't be rigid and locked down into the question order here that you must go in this. Try to follow a natural path through the conversation. If there's more than one of you in the discussion with a potential customer, you can have the person who's kind of taking notes, if you're a leading point, kind of go back through at the end and say, did we capture everything? Because again, you want to kind of go with the natural flow of it. Be ready to ask a lot of ad-lib questions. Be able to and ready to probe deeper. Ask 5 whys. You get an answer and it doesn't make sense. Ask why 5 times in a row. And also steer back to the key objectives. Sometimes the conversation will deviate. Kind of go back to make sure it's really clear the objectives of the meeting, what you're trying to learn, and how you're trying to help this potential customer or partner. So let's go over the key takeaways from this discussion today. First, meet with customers in person, early and often. You can't meet with enough customers and get enough customer feedback, so do it frequently. Think about testing your positioning. You think they have a big problem. Make sure that they have a big problem and you're addressing an actual need. Talk about your key benefits, who the competitors are, and what you think your unique differentiators are, and see if your customer perceives that the same way. Make sure when you go through all of these discussions, really go with the flow. You can't just go through exactly in the order that you're seeing in this presentation. Just go with the natural flow of the conversation. And then a really important thing, get referrals. Great Dreamit companies and great Dreamit teams walk out of a meeting like this with another 2 or 3 people to speak with. And suddenly, within a matter of weeks, you have 20, 30, 40 new people to speak with, which is really powerful when you're an early stage company. So get those referrals and make sure to follow up. I'm Steve Barsh, Chief Innovation Officer of Dreamit. Thanks for spending time with us today, talking about meeting with customers early, the tricks and key questions you need to ask. Put it to great use. Let us know how it works for you.